So it's our policy that we don't recommend divorce to clients. We can say, these are the implications. You have to make this decision. And I'll tell you, if we were going to come close to recommending divorce to a client, it would be somebody who's been living, on the other coast for
a long time.
on the other coast for 20 years and with no relationship at all. Yes, this is something, if we're looking for opportunities to learn, let's
Don't
put
stay that long.
put at the top of the list here with an exclamation mark, that if you've been separated for more than 20 years.
Welcome to Life's Third Act, an enlightening look at estate planning, retirement, and beyond.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. This week we're going to talk about Tony Bennett. I know that's a name that if you're over, 60, for sure you understand this legendary singer. If you're over 40, there's a good chance you do. If you're under 40, take this show as an educational opportunity about somebody who really had an impact on popular music. I would have to say not to the same extent that, for example, Frank Sinatra did, but those who like Frank Sinatra, and I'm among them, I'm a huge Frank Sinatra fan. Those of you who watch this show know that. Those who like Frank Sinatra probably like Tony Bennett too, just not as much, perhaps. They were a little different, their styles. Tony Bennett was, I think, 11 years younger than Frank Sinatra. So there's a big difference. I mean, Frank Sinatra came into the world in 1915 or so, 15 or 16. And then we have Tony Bennett that didn't come along. He was born in 26. So that had Frank during, pre-World War II. He was making an impact. He was acquiring this reputation as a singer and just unfolding or emerging at the time was this whole idea of a single star singer that would outshine instrumentalists, would outshine orchestras. So that has introduced the world we have.
He definitely had some swagger, too, that lifestyle.
He did. His image was almost as important as the quality of his singing. And that was also something that I don't think Tony Bennett had that. He just didn't have all those things going on that Frank had going on that gave Frank a superstar status. One could argue the first true global superstar maybe ever. I mean, if you assume that anybody who could compete for that role couldn't have competed before communication technology of the early 20th century. So when we start looking at who is the first in the earliest 20th century that commanded name recognition around the planet, I'm sure there are a few contenders, but Frank Sinatra is definitely one of them.
Oh, goodness, yes. And the Rat Pack, all those guys.
that was later. But beginning very late 50s, early 60s was their heyday.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get talking about Frank Sinatra, but
that's another show.
you could tell I'd prefer to do another show on Frank Sinatra. But
let's do one a year just to get it out of your system.
We could. I don't think that would drive people away from the show. I know there are some people who would think that was great. We'd have to figure out what else we're going to have to say about his death and his estate planning if we do this. We'll have to change it to just talk about how great Frank Sinatra is. But Tony Bennett is definitely heavyweight.
He definitely is.
Yeah, among that genre of singers. Mm-hmm. Maybe really the last of singers who had who are not tenors and the people we associate that became, we saw music become popular in the 70s with guys who sang at the pitch that women do. And
but then he took quite the time out. He kind of lost his career, and then he came back.
He did.
At such a later time in life, and with Lady Gaga, who was like on top of everything, so much younger than him.
Yeah, that was an interesting combination.
Mm-hmm. Sure was. It came out of nowhere.
So why don't we go back then? Mm-hmm. And as those of you who watch the show, you know that we want to get to the point where we talk about. Yes, we spend a little time talking about the career, and that's always interesting with people. Often sometimes we do shows about people I know nothing about before the show other than maybe name recognition. But beyond that, I learn a lot about how important they are. And then it gives us a springboard to talk a little bit about, what can we learn in terms of the way they manage the latter stages of their life and their death and then their estate planning. So that really is where we want to get to at this show, and that kind of ties into the wheelhouse of Cordell and Cordell, our estate planning group. So that ultimately is the justification for this show, not our expertise regarding the lives of these people. Most of them have wonderful biographers who we perhaps should do referrals, because some of our sources come from these biographers as well as things we find online. So we try to assemble information in a fresh way. But ultimately, it's not going to be with the detail nor the expertise that you'll find with people who really know the lives of these people. What we're trying to do is set the stage for talking about these people as they pertain to estate planning and role models, either positive role models or negative role models.
What to do, what not to do.
Yeah,
where they went right, where they went wrong.
So let's talk a little bit about the life of Tony Bennett. I'll hand it to you.
Well,
Sherry.
he was born Anthony Dominic Benedito, and he was born August 3rd, 1926 in Queens, New York. He grew up in a family of Italian immigrants, and sadly his father died when he was just 10 years old. So I think that definitely, we've talked about that a lot when celebrities lose their parents at a young age. Definitely, stays with them. I mean, you can't get over such a thing.
It often inspires some degree of self-sufficiency and I think even raw, determined ambition among some of the examples we can think of where that's occurred. And perhaps Tony Bennett's one of those, but go ahead.
And he did deal with, poverty during the Great Depression after his father died. He loved jazz and pop singers, and he started singing at a very young age. And he ended up going to school. He studied painting and music, which I know we'll probably touch base on that, later too, about his love of art. But he sang wherever he could at social gatherings and restaurants.
And this is the late 40s. Yeah.
Yeah, because once 52, I think that's what it was, or before that. But he was drafted into the U.S. Army, and that was during the final years of World War II, which definitely has an effect on someone because, being drafted is so much different than enlisting.
Yeah, so that would have been 44, 45, I assume.
Mm-hmm. And then so he was there, and then when he got back out of service, he decided to pursue singing. And that's where, I had no idea when I was, researching a little bit more about him that Bob Hope comes into the picture in his life and definitely helped him out with a singing career.
Yeah.
No idea about that.
Well, yeah, Bob Hope, I guess had an opportunity to hear him sing, and Bob Hope was definitely somebody who could spot talent. So, and he was a heavyweight still in the industry
Big
in
name.
so many ways. I mean, widely, he and Bing Crosby were probably the most prominent names aside from Frank Sinatra in the 40s.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the name change, because I always think that's significant when people who from often some sort of ethnic background and they feel that it might work against them in terms of promotions and whatnot, so they change their name.
Yeah, it was a lot to say. Anthony Dominic Benedito.
Benedito.
Yeah. And so they changed it to Tony Bennett.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a star was born, as they say.
I mean, I think he could and should have kept his last name as it was.
Yeah, it's not that hard to say.
No.
So.
And I don't think there's prejudice against that for Italian singers. I mean, look, Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
Although Dean Martin, changed up his name, truncated it. So, but anyway, so we have him singing in the late 40s or in clubs and whatnot.
Early 50s, yeah.
And then he gets his first record contract with
that was with Columbia Records in 1950. His big hit was Because of You, which hit in 1951. And that went to the, up the charts, which of course he got more attention. So everybody knew or started to know who he was.
When did I Left My Heart in San Francisco? When did that hit occur? It was the late 50s, wasn't
Left
it?
My Heart in San Francisco. That happened in 1962. That was the big hit in 1962, and it got him 2 Grammy Awards.
62. Yeah. Now, many people who may not have registered who this guy is, when you think of the person kind of owns that song, I Left My Heart in San Francisco. So then surely you recognize that. Anyway, so Tony Bennett, he's off to a start. His career, it launches. It's not. We can't say that it is a particularly dazzling career, at least in the early years. I mean, there was success, and he was popular, but we can't compare him to those that we know were superstars. And we know that during the time that he's really starting to gain momentum, which would have been the late 50s, then we have coming into vogue with younger people is rock music and group music. Music by, whether it's Beach Boys, Beatles, so many groups, Clark Five, things like that, that people just thought they were starting to expect a different kind of music. So to think that you would have Tony Bennett had the misfortune of what would have been the height of his career in the 60s, he's dealing with this.
He's at the right place, and with a record label deal and all that, but kind of the wrong time.
Yeah. And the fact that he was able to have later in his life a resurgence. Let's talk about that.
Which that is just amazing because he was struggling. He had a lot of setbacks in the 70s and 80s. He actually left Columbia Records in 1972 because, there's so much pressure. Like you were saying, you've got the Beatles, you've got Elvis in there, you've got the Beach Boys and so many others. And it's like that's a lot of competition. And the young kids all want to hear rock and roll.
Yeah.
So, and he was kind of more adult standards and jazz. So they just weren't quite that into that. So, but what happened was in the 80s and 90s, he kind of made a comeback. He did some TV appearances and he collaborated with younger generations. And that included Lady Gaga, the most recent, which that one just took me by such surprise because Lady Gaga, I mean, you didn't think that, she likes jazz. But yeah, she did.
Yeah,
and then she brought him on board.
And it was huge.
Yes,
that combination.
Huge. And it was so out of left field. But
Right.
they have that love of New York together.
I have to admit, I was really skeptical when I heard about that the first time until I actually saw them perform together, and it was really good.
Yeah. And she was so, gracious with him, knowing that he was, much older, and there in the later years, he did struggle quite a bit.
Yeah. And you think about two performers, you couldn't, if you were asked to identify something more antithetical. I mean, those two, you couldn't come up with a combination like that.
No.
And yet they were both very, very talented. I mean, Lady Gaga, whether you like her music or not, the more you find out about her classical training and whatnot, she really is very talented musically. So it was a great combination. And to fill in a little bit of the detail over these decades, Tony Bennett had some success in the 60s. Again, no rockets blasting in terms of his career. Yeah. But then he struggled more in the 70s, and he kind of became irrelevant. He was drinking more. He had a period there when he was kind of always known, fairly or unfairly, as a drinker. And he smoked for many years. I'm curious. I didn't look up when he stopped smoking.
Well, it's not just about the smoking, no, but about when you're talking about some things that happened to him personal. He's getting some divorces in there.
Yeah,
you know, some rocky roads of relationships.
And we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
The only reason I bring up the smoking is singers today know, and to some great extent, singers then knew that smoking cannot be good for your voice. And you look at the fact that Frank Sinatra still was able to sing reasonably well in his 70s and in the 70s, then that's not to say that he should have been able to sing better. So he continued to smoke for many years and fairly heavy smoker. And singers pay a price for that in terms of the longevity. So I was just curious with Tony Bennett how long he had smoked because his voice
see that.
It sounded very rough in those last recordings, and the recordings with Lady Gaga, but still he could sing. And the whole idea is you're capturing, this legend. So you don't expect the legend in the form of the 21-year-old Tony Bennett.
Things change. Everything changes.
Yeah, legends don't sound like that anymore. So there were some things where his singing didn't maintain the quality that it might have otherwise. However, he still had the talent, and that emerged when he had this renaissance of sorts in the 90s. So it is interesting that his career, through what would have been, I guess, his prime years, was a period where he was just, as you said, in the wrong place, the wrong time. His era wasn't right, and it was luck perhaps that Frank Sinatra, was born just perfectly at a time when the singer is emerging from the orchestra, and Tommy Dorsey and others. He was, at one time, if you had asked Tommy Dorsey and other band leaders, big band was big in the 20s and 30s, what is the role of the singer in the future? They'd have thought, well, it's like the saxophone player, it's like the trumpet player. They're just, their instruments, their voice, and the same rules apply. You need the orchestra. The orchestra leader is going to be in control, the face of fame. But that didn't turn out to be true. And that started becoming clear in the latter 30s, say 37, 38. And so we know that Sinatra breaks his contract. So all that is to say that with Tony Bennett, his timing was such that, he's free of the bonds of an orchestral period. It's true, he escaped that. But then, he goes almost directly into the emergence of this whole new genre that was, his timing was wrong for that. He was born too early for that. So he was, if he had been
timing.
If he had been born, say, rather than in 26, if he had been born in 1940, 45, even 50, if he had been born later, I suspect that even though his voice is more of a baritone, still, I suspect that he would have made it commercially in a larger way.
Or maybe an extra Beach Boy. Maybe he would have filled in.
No, it's hard to imagine his voice fitting in some context. Yeah, Andy Williams is an example of somebody who came along a little later, but his voice was a register higher. So this tenor voice that he had, that's what Americans in the second half of the 20th century wanted. I don't completely understand that. I think it's a more male voice that you associate with male singers for centuries before. But yet, that's not what America and the world seemed to want then. So there is a question whether it would have mattered when he was born. But I have fun speculating.
I have a feeling. It is. It's about when and what you're exposed to, your generation. It has a lot of influence on a person.
Yeah. So he struggled, and we'll talk a bit about those divorces. But the good news is there was this renaissance when around toward the latter part of the 80s, people started to rediscover him, and the woman he was with at that time that he met in 87 or so that became his wife later and was with him till he died, she may have had a role in that. I don't know how much of the role she played, but doubtlessly she was helpful in that way. And so he ended up going out with a bang, so to speak.
Yeah.
He generated more money, I'm sure, in his last 20 years than he did the 20 years before, which is very unlikely. So let's talk about the marriages and the kids.
And the marriages and the kids. All right. His first wife, Patricia Beach, they married in 1952 till 1971. So they were together 19 years, and they had 2 sons. They had Danny and Day. Now, currently, Danny is now 71, just kind of let you know how old everybody is in this day. And Day, he is now 70. And again, that relationship lasted 19 years between he and his first wife. And then Tony met and married his second wife. They married in 1971. So if you recall, I just said he got divorced in 71. He also got married again in 1971. They separated in 1979. So they were together 8 years before they separated. But that divorce did not end until 2007. So they were like a full 28 years, but think about how long that took.
So they were living apart.
Yeah.
From 79 to 07.
Yeah.
That's really unusual.
But they did have 2 daughters. Maybe that's what kept them, from the full divorce. They had a daughter, Johanna, who is now 56, and that's the oldest daughter. And then their younger daughter, who's now 51, her name is Antonia. And everybody, all of his children have some sort of a career in either the music industry or movie industry. So didn't fall far from the tree.
No, they didn't.
Danny, their oldest son, he is an artist in management.
And that's an important point, entertainment management. And he's going to tie in here significantly more here in a few minutes. It's good to note that he founded this production company. It's called RPM Productions, and it's a management company that represents major artists.
And his dad.
Mainly his dad.
Yeah.
So, and then there's Day. He goes by Day. His name is actually Daigle, but it's D-A-E, so people call him Day. He's an audio engineer, music producer, founded Bennett Studios. Apparently he's won 10 Grammy Awards for work with artists, including his father. That's interesting. Not surprisingly, one related to Lady Gaga. It's probably the work that she did with his dad. Then the two daughters. Now, remember, the two sons are with the first wife.
Yes.
The two daughters are with the second wife.
And the kids are about 20 years apart.
Yeah, significant difference. And then there's the third wife that I mentioned a while ago that they got together in 87, ended up marrying not till 07 because, he was separated from his wife, that second wife, for so many years. But that was the person who he was married to until his death.
Yeah, so they were together 16.
Yeah. So, but Joanna, and it's spelled Johanna. I think that's pronounced Joanna. She and her sister chose to live more private lives, though she's done some acting. Apparently she had a small part in the film Goodfellas.
Yeah, she's a stunt woman. That's what I saw about her. I was like, what?
Well, she probably was very good. I haven't seen a picture of her. But so Antonia was a jazz singer and performer. She's a graduate of the Berklee College of Music. That's impressive. And she still performs regularly and has a number of albums.
Yeah, because she's just 51, so she's got time.
Right. So that's Antonia. So these are the four kids. They continue to be close to their dad, right? The last
over the years,
latter stages. So let's pick up. Now we're going to kind of move into the discussion where we'll focus on things that will tie in with the estate planning. Let's begin then, Sherry, and talk about this third marriage. It was somebody he had met and been with him or living together since 1987.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the guesstimation of when they got together. But they officially married in 2007, which they said that they had already been together 20 years. So just weren't married.
Yeah.
And, when you do the math on that, he didn't finalize that second divorce until 2007. So
it's a long period of separation, decades.
Yeah.
I can tell you as a divorce lawyer, that's generally not a good idea, as a former divorce lawyer, I should say.
Well, why would someone do that? Would it be because they don't want to split things? Is it because they have kids? I mean, what would be the case scenario that someone would stick around that long without a real divorce?
Sometimes there will be some reasoning behind it relating to, a plan to assure that estate planning is in place, that there are certain protections regarding inheritance and whatnot that they think might not be there otherwise. Maybe it's a source of reassurance. It could be more of an emotional thing and not a legal decision at all. And it might be that it limits the extent to which anyone can pursue seriously another relationship. It could be simply an insurance policy that each of them thinks of that ultimately, we can always go back, and that neither is prepared to commit to somebody else. And that's not uncommon. People separate with the expectation that, gee, if I meet somebody I really like and I want to marry, then I will divorce this person. But from a legal standpoint, that's a reckless decision. There are so many entanglements and implications relating to the debts of the other person, to other potential sources of liability, not to mention that there's, depending on the state you're in, there could be a claim to all the assets that you accumulate, arguably, or marital assets. Some states will consider if there's a period of separation, but I think that courts not unfairly can take the position that, look, as long as you chose to stay in this partnership, then we're going to assume that you wanted to have a partnership. And a partnership means that everything you acquire belongs in part to the other person. That's what partnership is in the business world, and that's its meaning even in lay terms. That's what partnership means. And so if you choose to stay married, we're going to assume, many divorce courts would say, we're going to assume that you intended for this person to share in your success. And if you had not intended for that, and if you wanted to stop it, we know that you knew that you could have done that very easily. You wouldn't even have had to get divorced. You could have gotten, in many states, a legal separation that clearly stops that clock. So if you think about it for a minute, it's not unfair for those courts that take a position that, look, you chose to stay married, that's fine. We don't know what your reasons were, but we understand that if you wanted to not be a partner, you could have chosen to do that. You chose to stay married. So we know you had your own reasons for giving half, potentially, of what you earned to the other party. So for those reasons, that's the primary issue in my mind, but also debts and obligations. You know, some things would fall on a marital estate, necessities and whatnot. Now, this varies from state to state, but you know, historically, it was true that to the extent that you had expenses, debts related to what they called necessaries, which means health care, things related to, you know, protection of someone's safety or health or security or basic needs for food and clothing and shelter, all those things would typically be regarded as necessaries, which means that a spouse could be held liable for those things that pertain to the other spouse. Now, some states that may not be on the books anymore, but I think that I'm communicating to you that there's just a lot of stuff associated with this thing called marriage. And the law, quite frankly, flatteringly, has decided to impute to this relationship great significance. And I don't think we want to diminish that and to say, oh, it's just this very, very basic bond that only relates to a specific narrow set of circumstances, you know, parentage, maybe some things relating to co-ownership of homes and other things. But for the most part, the law has placed upon marriage a whole lot of implications that ramify through many aspects of your financial and legal existence. And if you decide that you're married to somebody that you shouldn't be or that you don't want to be and you want out, then the way to get out is not to simply move out. Yeah, it's important that you do more than move out. And that means either getting a legal separation or getting a divorce. And despite Cordell & Cordell being the largest divorce firm in America, still we don't advocate divorce. We don't have to tell people you should get divorced because that's not our job. It's not our intention. One could even argue it's not even our desire. There are enough people who are determined to get divorced, and I hope among our clients for good reasons. And those people we want to represent zealously. But the idea that people should trivialize marital relationship is something that we don't do at Cordell & Cordell. So it's our policy that we don't recommend divorce to clients. We can say, these are the implications. You have to make this decision. And I'll tell you, if we were going to come close to recommending divorce to a client, it would be somebody who's been living, you know, on the other coast for
a long time,
on the other coast for 20 years, and with no relationship at all. So, yes, this is something. If we're looking for opportunities to learn, let's
Don't
put
stay that long.
put at the top of the list here with an exclamation mark that if you've been separated for more than 20 years and living your own life, and we know he was living with somebody else.
Yeah, I mean.
That's not a good idea. Now, I'll qualify that. If this person is the breadwinner, and I mean that in an especially grand way, to where all that's happening is the other person is accumulating more and more assets and great wealth, then one could argue cynically that, yeah, in that case, you do have a beneficiary of that separation and that lingering marital tie. And that's that, you know, they're letting the marital assets accumulate while they're living a life of apparent, you know, complete liberty. And yet their net worth is progressing at a brisk pace.
Yeah. And so they're just looking the other way. I know you're doing bad things on the Jumbotron. I saw it, but I'm not going to admit to it.
We'll try not to go into that. that whenever we bring up things like that, I worry that because they're topical now, that people will watch this 2 years from now and say, "What's this about a jumbotron?" There was
busted.
there was this executive at a startup who was with his HR chief people person, and they were at this Coldplay concert, and they called it Kiss Cam, focused on them, and suddenly it goes viral, and the world knows that I think that he is married and has kids. And I don't know about her, but so that's the scandal du jour.
Yeah. So good thing it wasn't around when Tony was, around.
So anyway, we've made our first point, this separation. So Tony, though, he gets divorced in 2007, and I'm sure with the intention at that point to turn around, as he did immediately, and he marries what is his third and final wife, and this is Susan. Now, he has no children with Susan. Yeah. There are 2 boys and 2 girls. The 2 boys were born to the first marriage. The 2 girls were born to the second marriage. There's a difference in age of 10-plus years between the kids, so they probably didn't have much of a close relationship among them, I'm sure, and they come from a little different perspectives, very much, I'm sure, also. So this kind of sets the stage for how should Tony Bennett have done his estate planning? Well, to his credit, he did do estate planning. I think his first estate planning was in 94. We'll go over that in just a second. I want to do a deep dive into some pleadings that have been filed with the court recently in New York that evidence this emerging lawsuit and ultimately questions about the estate as well. So, but in leading up to this, we know that Tony had a goal. He had a goal that he wanted all of his kids to be treated equally. And we've looked at, we tried to get a sense of what was his relationship with his kids in his final years. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. I think it was in 2017.
2016. So he lived with that for 7 years.
Yeah, so 7 years. And it doesn't mean he was completely incompetent by any means when he was first diagnosed. He probably did become legally incompetent sometime soon after that, I suspect, certainly, though, before his death. And in this scenario, though, Tony still seemed to see his kids. We don't know about the very final years. Often that becomes very controversial where you'll have one set of kids in these situations, which we've all seen. If you watch this show a lot, you've seen it a lot. You'll have one set of kids who will be close, or maybe the kids of the current spouse, and they'll have more access in those very final years when somebody has declined to such a point where they can't exert their will about seeing their other kids. So it's not uncommon for that to happen. I don't want to suggest, that this is necessarily devious on the part of the kids who are in control. It's just that they're there more, and there's no relationship, or even worse than that, often there's antagonism between all the kids. So it intentionally or unintentionally, it doesn't facilitate the outsiders getting in when they want to see the person.
Yeah, and with this, though, he had a unique relationship, though, with his sons because they were in the music industry as well, one, being his manager.
Yeah, especially his older son.
Yeah, his older son.
And we'll come to that one second. Let me first say that there was estate planning done. There was a trust created. You're going to hear a little bit more detail about that as I kind of walk through these pleadings that we've had pulled. I had our lawyers. We have Cordell & Cordell lawyers in New York State, and so we had them pull a copy of these pleadings that were just very recently filed. And this is a lawsuit by the daughters against the brothers and the third wife. So before we get there, though, I want to say that there was estate planning. It had a trust. The trust was in place that clearly expressed the intention for all 4 kids to be treated well. We believe that there was a positive relationship by all the kids with their dad, which isn't always true, and often is not true when you have kids from multiple marriages in the latter years of somebody that we've talked about on this show, is that sometimes there's just no relationship. But in this case, there was, and so we think that Tony clearly wanted all of his kids to benefit, despite having this closer relationship with his son that you mentioned, and we'll talk in more detail about Danny. But Danny was the one clearly that was front and center among the kids in their dad's life. He was the one who was most directly involved as a direct manager, business manager, personal manager. So even before he assumed the role as he did in the estate planning of being the trustee and also holding the durable power of attorney, having the authority to act under the durable power of attorney, called attorney in fact. Apart from that, though, he was managing much of Tony's life. So these lines start merging, and this brings up another point of concern when you're doing estate planning. When you anticipate the possibility of conflict among your family members, and there's every reason to expect it here. You had the two boys and the two girls. I'm sure there was not a warm relationship, and even if it had been superficially warm, you have reason to believe that conflict would develop. And so I hold Tony responsible, not in his very last years, but before that, when he was made this initial plan. The initial plan called for his son and him and his wife at the time. All three were named as trustees of this trust that was in place. And I suspect it was a living trust, a revocable trust at the time, not an irrevocable trust. But either way, they were both named. So it kind of assumed that Tony would stay in that role until at some point he couldn't, and then his wife would maybe stay in that role. And then the pleadings suggest it became a point where Tony is listed and his son Danny. So we know, and I'll stick with that characterization in talking about the unfolding events, is you have Danny that is effectively in exclusive control regarding this trust, because the other trustee is who? It's the person who now is probably incompetent. So Tony and his son Danny are both named. Well, Tony's fallen off somewhere along the way, and it probably was gradual, and it might have been complete in a practical terms from the outset. It might have been soon after this was created, let's say in the aughts of 2000s. During that period of time, I suspect that Tony was not that engaged, but at least he was engaged enough to recognize when things are going on. And apparently he felt okay with Danny playing this role. Clearly he trusted Danny, or he wouldn't have named him in all these roles. Yeah. First of all, he wouldn't have had him as his business manager. And it had been for decades. It wasn't a role he assumed at the very end. And to name him as the attorney in fact under your durable power of attorney. That says a lot. I mean, that's an expression of trust. We've talked on the show before that durable powers of attorney are this incredibly powerful instrument that allows you to walk around and sign things on behalf of this other person, in a much less structured way than, say, as a trustee of a trust, where there's some built-in, one could argue there's built-in controls. There are legal controls as far as a durable power of attorney. Don't get me wrong. There's consequences if you abuse it, but that's after the fact. Meaning in real time, that person has a lot of authority. So he gave him that. And then, so he's business manager, the holder of the attorney in fact under his durable power of attorney, and also, of course, his trustee. So, I mean, that's
a lot of pressure on Danny.
Well,
really,
you call it pressure, you call it opportunity. But
yeah.
I would say that this is a mistake that I want to pause. And this is one of those big points to be made as we talk about his life and planning is, this was really setting this up, not only for perhaps Danny's misbehavior, and I use this with caution. We don't have proof of this. This is an allegation, but it's a temptation, even if it wasn't in fact true. It's a temptation to put somebody with that level of authority over the assets, especially when you know that some of your children will suspect and will accuse and perhaps will be just offended by the choice. It's not a good thing to do. And I think Tony was a good guy by all accounts. I think he loved his kids, as we've already talked about. Mm-hmm. He had a good relationship. And he expressed in his estate planning documents his very clear determination that all his kids benefit equally. And we'll also come to in a minute as we go through this document the fact that he even made a specific provision that he wanted the allocation, this equalization of his estate among his 4 kids. He wanted this to be in a manner that made adjustments for the benefits that were afforded some of the kids during their lifetime. So that required going back and looking at the gift tax return that would have been filed each year when things were given away. then there would be an adjustment to that person's share, which is really thoughtful. I mean, it's a good way to do it. It allows you to hand out, to give bequests to children early during your lifetime. Even though you may do it to one child and you have 4, that's okay because there will be an adjustment. The other 3 will know that. So it doesn't cause the sort of resentment that it otherwise would. And maybe Tony fully expected that Danny would be the one who would be, taking things out, might choose to lend himself money or give himself money being in the position he was in. I mean, he had the ability, the autonomy to pretty much do what he wanted, it appears from the court documents. So that I guess is that mistake kind of set the stage for the things that have followed. So now let's move over. I want to talk about this pleading. So one of our attorneys in I think it's our Albany office, he pulled a copy of this pleading, which was only filed, I think it was filed this month. And let me pull it up here. Looks like it's 3/31/2025. So here is on this pleading, this was a lawsuit that has been filed, and it's been filed by the 2 daughters. So it's Joanna and Antonia. They're alleging that money was not paid out as it should have been. Their suit is against Danny. It's against Danny's brother, Daigle, and it names the current wife, Susan Bennett. But now it really is focused on Danny. So it's naming Daigle and Susan as beneficiaries to the extent that they received a disproportionate share. So,
well, it looks like they also have listed the RPM Music. So how does that
Right. So
when you're looking at that?
RPM Music is the entity that is owned by Danny. So it's still Dan. These are all Danny directed. So the plaintiffs, Joanna and Antonio Benedetto, as beneficiaries of the Tony Bennett 1994 Family Trust. So they're suing as beneficiaries of that trust. And they're also suing as members of Benedetto Arts. Now, this is an LLC that was formed to hold some of the intellectual property that Tony Bennett had. It relates to the catalog of music. It relates to name, likeness, image things. So much of that intellectual property was housed in the LLC. And an LLC, I don't want to get too deep into this, so some of you can fast forward, but an LLC is an important tool in estate planning, and it affords some protection like a corporation, but it can be a sort of pass-through entity so that it may not have any tax consequences like a corporation often does, unless an S-corp is similar to an LLC in some ways. But an LLC it can be member managed, meaning every person who owns a part of the LLC can run it, can have equal voice in running it. More commonly, you have manager ran LLC, in which case the manager is the person who's designated with the authority to run the entity. So if you have a manager appointed, as you do in the LLC that was created by Tony Bennett or his estate planners, then that person is supposed to act in accordance with an operating agreement. An operating agreement is what runs the LLC, and it sets up the rules. So the members included all the kids, and I think it included the current wife as well, Susan. And yet, though, it designated Danny in this role. So Danny has a fiduciary duty when he's running this LLC. And keep in mind, the LLC is referring to Benedetto Arts, which, remember, Benedetto is the original name of Tony Bennett, right?
Yep, before Bob helped him change it.
So this means that there's a lot of value in this entity. And it was a smart way to do it because the trust owned also part of this entity. So when you create an LLC to plan to put assets in there, so it protects your other stuff from liabilities that might arise within that. So If you run a business where there could be lawsuits resulting from that business, you want to put it in something that keeps liability limited to that entity. And LLC does that. Corporations also provide that role. But LLCs are very flexible, and they're cheap to create, and they're cheap to manage. We're going to go ahead and conclude this episode. We're going to pick up again with the next episode, and I encourage you to tune in for that. That will probably be the final one. We'll try to get this all into one next episode so we don't end up with 3 episodes. So with that, we'll conclude this one, and this has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Till next time, take care.
We hope you enjoyed Life's Third Act, sponsored by Cordell & Cordell, your advisors for estate planning and beyond. Subscribe and join us weekly for thought-provoking discussion and topics exclusively focused on estate planning and your financial future. Discover more at CordellCordell.com. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.